Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at building an interface. We're going to implement one and we're also going to use one as a return value. So let's get started here by first adding our own interface. I am going to call it my iBook repository. So we made an interface. We're done. All right, now let's start defining it. We're going to, inside our interface here, this is our iBook repository. This is going to populate the data of our application. That's what the repository part of this word is. And the book is referring to the part that we're going to be using our data. We're going to build an IEnumerable of type book. And our function here is get all books. So this interface here is going to give us the ability to do two different things. We're not able to define any code inside this interface. And that's more or less the point of the interface. You're not supposed to be defining the code of the interface. What you're allowing yourself to do is build other classes that use this interface, that use this portion of the interface, and then you can use either class if this is the variable type that you define. So the large benefit of that is we can easily jump between different repositories. We can look at just a testing repository. We can build just like a temporary, here's my working mock repository to build the logic of my code. I don't want to focus on the data portion. And then when we're ready, we can instead just hook up our main database to our program. But the cool thing is we don't need to do that till the end once we feel comfortable with the logic of our code. So that's what building this iBook repository interface allows us to do. Then the IEnumerable interface, we're using an existing interface built inside of C#.net here, and that'll give us the ability to return different variable types. Remember, this is the return type of our getAllBooks method. So we are returning a value, and by putting this interface here, I'm able to return either a array, a list, or anything that can run through a for each loop, I believe, can be implemented by this interface. So let's continue writing our interface implementations. And then it uses very similar code to the class inheritance, but we typically say that it's implementing. And now we just write the class. Now you'll see a warning here, and it's telling us that we must use this method. But because of that relationship, it means that we can start using this variable type rather than a mock book repository in areas where we want to create flexibility in our code. So let's build this method that it's requesting we do. And then we need to define the type here. No parameters, and then I am just going to copy this block of code here because it'll save us a good deal of time. So what we're doing here is we're just returning this book, this list of books. So this is how our program was running earlier. We have that in the GUI, the user form here, I believe. Yeah. No. Where did we put it? That's right here. We have that in the library book manager here. We have all of this initialization. So I'm just pulling this out. And in place of that, we're going to call this method. Now let's also implement a second version of this mock book repository, and we'll see how easy it is to jump between the two. We're going to call this our SQLite book repository. So this will be our database when we're ready to use it. iBook repository. Now we need to do this get all books function here. So I'm just going to copy this, but we're going to modify the interior of it. Remember, it needs to be of the same format. It needs to have this method here. And here we're just going to return a new book array of size 1. And inside of it, let's put new book. And we'll just do test SQLite repo. Test and null. And I'm missing a semicolon. Doesn't like the null, but that was to be expected here. Let's see if I've copied everything else that I need. Looks like I'm missing. Let me just grab the code that I am confident with here. I was missing one of these. And then we want to, to use this null in place of the genre fiction. I can show that real quick. We need to use the book class here. And we just put a question mark at the end of this genre. That allows us to create a nullable enum here. You see that error goes away. So yeah, now we've implemented polymorphism in 2 different ways. We've allowed ourselves to create 2 different return types for our IEnumerable get all books, and then so now we can return an array down here or a list up here. We're doing it in both circumstances, both will work. And then we've also created 2 iBook repositories so we could switch between those 2 very easily. And now we want to update this code. This code, books will be using book. We need to send in the book repository. So here we're doing what's called some dependency inversion. So by putting this guy right here, we are now creating a situation where we can easily change this iBook repository to be this mock or this SQLite. And then whatever method is calling that, which is our GUI here, that our GUI will then dictate which repository we're going to use. And so to do that, we're going to put in this method here, new mock repository. And we're getting an error? No. Looks good. So now it's going to call this, and now we want to call the get all books method. And it's going to be an IEnumerable So we need to convert that to this data type right here because we're using a list inside of this method. So we use toList. toList. So now we've converted it to a list. So here we're using our implementation. And that's all it will take to use our interface. So let's run the code. We've removed this code from here and brought it into an interface, and then we'll run this for good measure and see how that works. Cool, so we've seen our code now brings in our books. Let's switch to this SQLite repository and see how easily we can just switch between a database or data that we're just defining within our code. We have hard-coded, and then this will be, in the future, this will have some SQL queries, and it'll look at our long-term data storage. And just like that, we were able to switch between those two using two forms of polymorphism, right? So the polymorphism here is we've created a new SQLite repository of type iBook repository. So right here we have iBook repository being the type, taking it in, and it's morphing into a SQLite repository or the mock book repository. And if we are using the SQLite repository, then the getAllBooks function is returning a book array through the IEnumerable, and then we're converting it to a list inside our book manager, or we are returning a list here, and become as a IEnumerable interface, and then that is being converted back into a list over here. So we've created flexibility with our return type as well. So these are two pretty straightforward ways to both create your own interface and implement it, or use an existing interface and change the variable type that you're using. And a couple of key points here that I would just like to go over, some of the big high-level programming lingo that you'll hear deeper in your programming career. You have some of the single responsibility principle. Using these two different repositories, you're able to make sure that certain areas of your code don't have too much going on within them. You're able to say, okay, here is where I test my code, here is where I implement my database. And now that we've added this iBook repository, we're using this dependency inversion principle, which is quite typical when you're trying to create modular changing code. You're able to send in this generic variable which can be changed at a later point. Then I don't need to actually update the library book manager. As you saw, all I did was I changed what was calling this method. So the library book manager is encapsulating the code that mostly focuses on just doing the logic of reserving books, returning books, and it's less focused on having these concrete classes where I'm defining what type of data set I'm using. So we're able to de-link the UI and the database from the core logic of the code with encapsulation. And this also promotes loose coupling, which is good for making changes in the future. We don't need to change the library book manager to change which data is going in. So those are some of the high level core concepts of what is going on with our interfaces here. I hope this was instructive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.